Okay, it is like, I don't know if you can even see the time on. I'm outside South Station, Boston. It's about 2:20 in the morning on April, I think it's April 29th, 2026. And I'm gonna, there's another video where I'm going to talk about links between Judeo-Christianity and Taoism. And this is kind of a core teaching. So this is the yin yang symbol, which represents not opposing forces, complementary forces in nature, passive and active and passive and active, feminine, masculine, listening, talking. I've spoken in other videos about all the various ways in which this is receptive, this is creative, that kind of thing. So if you recall the story of in the the second and third mostly chapters of the book of Genesis, Adam and Eve. Okay, so you got two people, you got a woman and a man, and they're in a garden. And then there's a tree of knowledge of good and evil. And in Genesis 2, God says to Adam, do not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for if you eat it, you shall surely die. Okay, so this, and then in Genesis 3, the serpent says to Eve, did God really tell you not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil? And Eve looks upon the tree and sees that it is good to look upon, desirous for gaining wisdom and satisfying hunger. And so she takes some and then gives some to her husband. And then they, after that, they become ashamed when they hear God walking in the garden, and they make coverings for themselves, like with leaves and stuff. And then God says, did you eat from the tree I told you not to eat from? And then they get evicted from the Garden of Eden. So this is God's view of a tree. Okay, so here's the trunk. It is circular. Tree trunks tend to be circular. This is both a root underneath the ground and branches above the ground. Here's some fruit right here. God sees the beginning of the tree. This is the under the ground and the seed before the tree became a tree. God sees the roots that sprout under the ground. If you imagine like an aerial view, God's looking down and he can see the fruit, and here's the trunk. It's an abstraction, and it's a multi-level abstraction, but the idea is that God's view of the tree is timeless. So he sees the beginning of the tree in the ground as a seed. He sees the roots. I shouldn't say he, I'll say it to describe God for the moment. The roots, God's, or just God. I shouldn't even put a pronoun on it. So God sees the roots. God also sees the branches. God sees all the various moments in the tree's life all at once. Here's the end of the tree's life. This is above ground, and someone has chopped it down. So Adam and Eve takes a bite, eats some of the fruit. This is also itself an abstraction of a piece of fruit with bites taken out of it. Eve has some, Adam has some. So you see a bite here, what have you. You can imagine Eve loves Adam, Adam loves Eve. Eve takes a bigger bite than Adam does. Maybe. Okay? And then they get ashamed. They hear God walking in the garden. So you imagine like there's a path, and maybe this is God, or maybe that they're over here and they're hiding, and they hear God, and then they cut the tree down. So if you got an aerial view of the of the garden, and there's the tree trunk. It has been cut down, and they make coverings for themselves. Okay, now that whole story of Adam and Eve derives from this picture. Here's the serpent, and the serpent, one of the consequences of the fall is that God says to the serpent, I will create enmity between you and the woman. So it creates a separation between man and female, between Adam and Eve. And the basic concept is, so there's, you've got all the aspects. You've got a timeless, comprehensive, holistic view of a tree, how it started, how it ended, and everything in between. Sort of from more of an aerial view, like God's perspective. That's how God sees things. Everything at once, not moment by moment like us. It's analogous to the author of a book versus the reader of a book. We read the book one moment at a time. The author sees the whole thing and employs literary techniques like foreshadowing and character arcs, and there are themes and motifs and patterns and metaphors and everything else. And this is an eternalistic view of the tree. Eternalism is an idea in the philosophy of time that past, present, and future all really in reality coexist at once, as if reality is in fact a book that is all written and we are merely looking at one page at a time. Einstein's theory of relativity is one good reason for believing that eternalism is the way things are, and because Einstein established that, based upon your velocity and your location, time can pass differently for different people. And so you can imagine two people reading a book. They start, one person might be on a different, you give them 10 minutes, they open the book and start reading. One person might be ahead of the other person, but it would be incorrect for the person who is ahead of the other person to say that the past, where the person who's reading slower, what they are reading still exists for them, and the person who's reading faster, what they are reading still exists for them. So it's this idea, you can kind of see the whole thing. This is like the book of a tree, the whole tree's life, from seed to being cut down and everything in between. The roots, the trunk, the branches, everything else. The fruit. So Eve takes a larger bite. Adam takes a smaller bite. Eve bites and then sees that it's good and shares it with her husband. So when Jesus is born, wise men from the east come to him. Taoism derives from Asia, China, and which is east of where Jesus was born. And Adam calls Eve because Eve means the mother of all things. That is the Tao. If you read the Tao Te Ching, the Tao is described as the mother of all things. It is not the parent of all things. It is not the father of all things. It is the mother of all things. So you can imagine a man and a woman, let's just say, being parents of a child. The woman experiences all the time in the womb with the child and breastfeeding the child, like two nipples. And here's milk coming out of her breast, and here's a covered breast as the child covers it with its mouth. The man can't experience that. The man only experiences time outside the womb with the child and isn't able to nurture it in exactly the same way. But the Tao, being the mother of all things, is the aspiration to strive for. If you think about being a full human, being a compassionate human being, to think about things in a maternalistic, sensitive, nurturing perspective, the natural way of things is to be the mother, and it is the mother of all things. So if you encounter someone, as I've mentioned before, if you look at someone, you become pregnant with them in the sense that light enters your body and they're inside your body, and you are to be to treat them as if you were their mother, regardless of what your anatomy is. And so this yin yang thing right here becomes the fruit that Eve, the mother of all things, from the East, wisdom from the East, shares with her husband, the Hebrew culture that Jesus was born into, that Jesus was trying to unite. And this is not a separating line, but trying to bring them together. And so it's a convergence of Eastern and Western wisdom, and Adam and Eve represents Taoism, Adam represents Hebrew culture. And it's also, in order to do this, you have to see this as a tree, as an eternalistic view of a tree. You have to empathize with God as a timeless being. You have to empathize with God and ask yourself, what might it like to be a creature like that, and what motivations might they have? And that gets you a lot further. That type of deep empathy with God and with other people allows you to understand. You ask very different questions than if you don't empathize, and you come to very different understandings if you don't empathize. And so when God tells Adam, don't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, he doesn't tell him don't eat from the tree of life, but after they eat, God says, if they've now eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, if they eat from the tree of life, they'll be just like us. God says us, and so God evicts them from the garden. The tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil are the same thing. This is the tree of life. This is the life of a tree. This is the life of a tree, and it is not intended to be a bad good division. It is not intended to be knowledge of good and evil, or good and evil, depending on how you split it up. It is not intended to, for instance, things like gender expectations. Boys don't cry. Let's just say boys don't cry, or maids should be women. That would be another one. Those are types of things where you take them and you separate, and you use this as a separating line, and that's not the intention here. This is not a separating line. It is pure abstraction, and we can't see like God sees. So there's a very simple abstraction that you then expand via empathy with God into God's understanding of a tree, which is a microcosm of God's understanding of everything. And we went down the road of treating it like good and evil, and having all kinds of rules. There were many gender rules and social rules, and it's not just gender, it's like what religion you are and everything else that were present in Hebrew culture and are present in many other cultures and religions and societies, and that is unnatural. It's not part of the design of nature. It's humans add it on top of it. And so the idea that Adam took a small bite and Eve took a big bite, everybody should take a big bite of other people's experience. So you have, here's someone you see, try to be them. Put yourself in their position and feel their experience. So this is not just the view of a tree, it's a view of empathy itself. You see someone that's physically external to you, but you internalize them. So, say you hear someone, you put yourself in their position, you take them and internalize them inside yourself, and then you can feel exactly what they feel. The circle, it's the way I drew it, it's not quite even because I just scribbled it, but there's as much darkness as light here, and you know, Jesus says, if the darkness within you is light, how great is that darkness? The darkness is the light. And so you try and become the other person in your imagination. You try and become God in your imagination when you try and understand nature, when you try and understand scripture. And that's how you come to the understanding that this is a picture of the tree of life, which then got misunderstood as a tree of knowledge of good and evil. And the problem with the Tower of Babel is people's language gets confused. It's a misunderstanding, a misperception. And one of the reasons that the language gets confused is that language is on top, something we added on top of nature. It's very useful, but to see the word tree as a tree is incorrect. They're pointers they're pointers to real things, not the real things themselves. And we need to be cognizant of the way the mind works and the types of traps that we could fall into. But that's the basic idea behind the whole Garden of Eden story. And the two trees are really one tree. You see, there's two trees here. You can see this as the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The tree of knowledge of good and evil would be this one because it is creative. We start breaking things into, yeah, that's good and that's bad. The tree of life is pure receptive. So this is creative, this is receptive. You look at it, oh yes, that's a tree, I'm receptive to it. Versus this one is, well, I see a tree and now I'm going to decide whether I like it or not. So that's the basic idea. And that is the basis for pretty much everything that happens in the scripture. The Song of Songs, the Song of Solomon, is a love story between two lovers, and it is on one level east and west coming together, Eastern wisdom and Eastern wisdom and Judeo-Christian culture, which we tend to call, which Western culture is based on it, coming together and converging and not being separated, but being unified, and not seeing this as a dividing line, but it's an abstraction. Like I said, it's a tree root, it's a road that God might be walking on, it's branches, all those other things. And it's a unifying thing, to be the mother of all things. Eve is the mother of all things, so everything in this picture is important and of equal importance, and depending upon the context.